So welcome everyone. It's really great to be here in Stockholm and to have so many voices and experiences from all over the world around civic participation. I don't know about you, but I think certainly in Sweden this is an issue which has really risen and become much more important over the last couple of years. When I started working with this 15 years ago, my parents didn't know what the heck I was doing. And it was very hard to explain to people in local government what I did. What is citizen participation? What does this mean? What is dialogue? And we use many different words to describe this work around citizen participation between elections. But today I feel like maybe my parents still don't know quite what I do. But certainly when I go out and talk to members in local government, there is much more knowledge in Sweden on understanding what this is. So this is clearly something which feels very relevant, as Ann-Margrethe said, to Swedish local authorities. So we have two great panels here today. One which is an expert perspective on citizen participation, and then we will also hear of the vital perspective of the politicians. And it's always tricky when you talk about expert perspectives, because a lot of us in this room have worked really hard to broaden and say everyone is an expert, everyone has value. And I think everyone in this room and everyone at this conference has a lot of value, and so by all means, the experts that we are calling to the stage are by no means the only people who are experts. But these are some amazing voices. So we have, first of all, I'm going to take them in alphabetical order. We have Giovanni Allegretti, who many of you know, professor at the University of Coimbra, but also works not just in Portugal, but basically everywhere, I think. We have
like gods.
We have Josh Lerner, who's the chair of the Participatory Budgeting project in the US and has a lot of experience, both as a thinker and a doer, around particularly participatory budgeting. Martin Sande from Sweden, runs Dialogues, and Martin has worked a lot with complex issues, the really thorny, difficult issues that we'd like to avoid and to thinking about. How do local authorities deal with that? And Ann Tortzen from Denmark and the Center for Borgerdialog, and she'll have to excuse my atrocious Danish, the Center for Citizen Dialogue. And when I was trying to think of what's the red thread here with all these participants, I think it's that all of you straddle that divide between thinking and doing. You're all very much active in the doing side, but you're also very much people who've thought and published. So I would like to, we're going to take some time now to really understand what your thoughts are. And I'll take them in alphabetical order, because that seems to be the fairest way. And I'd like to start with this very basic question. Why is citizen participation important? Why is this conference important? Why did you choose to come here today? Giovanni?
I think that's being that my mother is a seismic engineer, I think that the vision is the most important things I can share with you in the first place. And my vision is that if we work with many different participatory processes, sometimes directed to targeting different people, we can construct a sort of anti-seismic cage. I know that Sweden is not exactly a seismic country, but that means that the walls of a house will be kept together while the earthquake is happening. And I think an earthquake is happening in our politics. And so the way in which we structure our participatory processes will be the way in which we will fight against the earthquake and possibly keeping together all the wall of the house. And at the same time, we will be fostering what my director calls ecology of knowledge through this different system. For many of our countries, maybe not for yours, is very important also the capacity of participation to help in a moment of shrinking of resources, especially at local level. So for many of us, devices like participatory budgeting are very important because they put money not at first, so it's not the first goal, but it's the first stage. So when you clarify things about your money, you avoid to have a gatekeeper that in the end of a participatory process will tell you, no, sorry, thank you very much for the idea, but it's unfeasible because it's not realistic, we don't have money. So starting with money can be a big help to allow us to work in a good way, and also to face a problem we have when you do a lot of investments. And every investment that we do will need maintenance and upkeeping in time. So there will be a moment in public budgets in which we don't have money for investments anymore. So we must search for new creative way also to fund our investments and keeping maintenance, because the highest blockage I see in people imagining new things is the fear they have that these new things will not be maintained properly. And so sometimes they castrate their creativity and fantasy because they are scared that the things that will be done will be destroyed, vandalized in a few days then. And so this helps us also to imagine a world in which we take care of management of expectation. So knowing that satisfaction is major or equal to result less expectation. And when we are not sure if we will have the strength to deliver results, maybe it's better that we will create less expectation and go slowly. And I think it's also very important that participation gives us the possibility to have recognition and redistribution, which are the essence of social inclusion. I like the sentence that say that participation can help us to reflect on how fulfilling the right to be equal whenever difference makes us inferior, and the right to be different whenever equality discharacterizes us. This means in the political world also investments, discussing about these typologies of investments which reach different results but requires different investments. And for that, I think it's very important to work also on methodologies. Methodologies are very important because they can help us to reduce the competitional parts that exist in every participatory system, which is a fight for scarce resources somehow, and maximize the capacity of producing solidarity and shared visions. And so we will be working on systems that somehow repeating themselves, and that's why PB is important, because it's a cyclical process. It's not an ad hoc process. It's a repeated process. It will create more and more social and cultural capital. That means that the people that in the beginning guarantee the qualitative legitimation of the process, because they are few but very committed, they will be growing in number, and not only the people who vote and does a small, easy job will be growing in number. So I think that this is very important, and I wanted to finish with two small examples which are very different, and you will see in these days here, of investments on social and capital and social cultural skills. The first one is the electronic system that is used in Madrid to propose and voting in several participatory processes, Consul. Consul is not a system that is investing in spending money on consultants and technologies. Is investing on hackathons, is investing on scholarship to create a community around the technology in order that the technology can be alive, but spending the money on the people instead of spending the money on the system. And the second one is Cascais City Points. Is a very still underneath innovation that the city of Cascais is doing. So people doing important actions as citizens will gain some points that they can reinvest not only in benefit for themselves, but in community benefit, like helping animals and other things. The system system is being tested very slowly because the fear is to gamify democracy. Gamification can help democracy, but democracy cannot be reduced to a game. And so I finish with this image. Always Cascais is a book which tells the stories of the investments of people in participatory budgeting from the side of the people. I think it's very important to recognize that when we do participation, we are not inside an institutional system, but we are working in an ecosystem where people produce their own vision of the process alone. And so we have to remember, and this is the last slide, I swear, we have to remember that participation is about very different things. There are the spaces that we create as technicians, as politicians, and then there are the natural ways in which people participate, what Ibarra calls participation by eruption. We don't have to deny the coexistence of these two systems, because in many cases politicians think that when they set an official process, if people do not participate there, their actions are to be criminalized. So I think that these two systems are an ecosystem that live together, and we have to remind about that all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Giovanni. So
I avoided degolation because it was coming.
We started with the seismic shift, and we ended up with an eruption of participation. So there's a nice geological metaphor going on here. I mean, I heard you talking about the shrinking resources, the need for expectation management, the need to balance this kind of equality, but also allowing people to be different and people to tell their own stories. And you also mentioned gamification, which I know is something that, Josh, you've talked about and, of course, worked a lot with participatory budgeting. What's your perspective from the North American context?
Great. So thank you, Edward, and thank you so much to the conference organizers and to all of you. We're excited to talk with you the next couple of days. So I'll admit that when someone asks me to talk about the North American or US context after the election of Trump, it feels a bit like an accountability session. So why did you do that? What's wrong with you? And so first, I'll start by saying I'm sorry that I didn't vote for Trump, and that we're all learning in the US what happened and how we can do better, and hope to learn together with you. So I'm going to share some of that learning that is based on the US, but I think is also useful more broadly. And Trump doesn't represent me, doesn't represent a lot of us in the US, and I think that really points to one of the main problems that we're seeing now is a really deep crisis in representative democracy in the US. And a representative democracy that's neither representative nor democratic, where the people who are elected do not represent us, that they're much richer, whiter, older, they don't have a strong connection with the people, and where our government is not democratic, where literally the will of the people is not deciding what happens. Even at a basic level like our president, the candidate who got the most votes was not elected. And we're seeing this have really big impacts. We're seeing literally that people are dying as a result of this. Whether it's in schools in the US where you're seeing school shootings and elected officials who are more accountable to gun lobbyists than to students, whether it's in the streets of our cities every day, where Black people are routinely being shot by police and elected officials are not doing anything about it, or whether it's Palestinians being shot in Gaza because we decide to move our embassy to Jerusalem. And so we're seeing these have really deadly consequences. And this isn't new, actually. What's new is that this is more visible. We're seeing this now. This has been happening for decades, for centuries in the US. And now we're seeing it a bit more. And we're seeing the effects of when there's this deep disconnect, this really broken relationship between government and the people. So we're seeing that people are losing trust in government. Trust in government is at an all-time low in the US. That people increasingly don't believe the government is a solution. They see it as a problem, something to dismantle, to tear down, to reduce. And this is resulting in a lot of our government, our social safety net, our agencies being downsized and actually getting rid of government in many respects. And so this deep crisis of representative democracy, the second point is that our problem that we usually look to elections as the solution. And elections cannot fix this problem. So we can't just expect to elect new people and to change the system. And we certainly can't expect that if we engage people once a year or once every 4 years, as in Sweden, asking them to vote, that that's going to fix the problem. You know, if you have a bad relationship with your kids or your parents and you think that if you call them once a year, that will fix it, it's not going to work. And the same thing for governments, that if we focus all of our attention on elections, that we're not fixing the problem. We're not even addressing the symptoms of the problem, really. We're just displacing our attention from that. And so the third thing that's more hopeful that we're seeing, and that I think is why we're all here, is that there are a lot better ways to build a strong relationship between government and the people than elections. So we can have good discussions, like in deliberative democracy. We can do things together, like in co-production. We can do art, like in Theater of the Oppressed or Legislative Theater. We can dream big dreams and make big decisions, like in participatory budgeting. And so these are all more meaningful ways of building a relationship between governments and the people that I think we need to invest in more. That's why civic participation, citizen participation is important to me, because it's a much better way of addressing these root causes of the problems that we're seeing rather than just treating the symptoms. And we're seeing that it has really strong results. So in participatory budgeting in the US, we see that once people participate, trust in government increases, trust in the government that engages them. They're actually still very cynical about government overall, but they trust elected officials who actually ask them to participate. We're seeing that people come to value government as something good, and they see the impact it has in their lives, how it makes their schools better, their streets safer, their parks more enjoyable, that people's relationships and connections with officials become closer. They talk with their officials more. Representatives can actually be more representative. They can know better what people want, and they can better serve the people. And that it results in better decisions. So money is spent better. It's spent in more equitable ways, going to needs that people have. It's going to new communities. And we're seeing that what it's doing is it's treating a lot of these root causes, the reasons people are stepping back from government, by showing them a reason to engage. So my hope for us here and in our work is that we can step back a bit from our obsessive focus on elections, and that we can devote just a bit more of our time to the long-term health of our democracy and citizen participation. And that in doing so, we can show people why government is worthwhile, why it's valuable, why they should participate, and also to change this broken relationship between elected officials and the people, so we're actually working together and have a democracy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Josh. So I heard, I mean, it's perhaps a difficult time to be saying don't focus on the election because we have one a couple of months away. But I think it's a very valuable thinking. And I was struck by you mentioned the word relationship a lot. And I think in local government, certainly in Sweden, sometimes we focused a lot on delivering services. The role is to kind of deliver things and make things and do things. And if we reframe the role of local government to build relationships, what does that mean and how do you do things differently? Thank you for that. Martin, you've worked a lot in Sweden and in other places. And so is anything which you've heard resonated with your experiences here?
Definitely. First of all, I'm sorry. Also saying we're on a path which I am strongly, deeply worried about. And as Ann-Margret said in the initial phase here, we have a democracy working and we have taken it for granted, which really worries me. I'm really obsessed with the idea we have to do this in a different way, and people who know me know that I have an obsessive side, so I want to tell everything at the same time, which of course is a restraint in these minutes. So I actually wrote 7 postcards to you. I have this quote which I often think about. Winston Churchill supposed to have said, "I'm sorry I wrote you a letter, I didn't have time to write you a postcard." Because the postcard is the hardest way of giving such major info in a very short period of time. So the first postcard says this: we need to address the fact, or at least my opinion that it is a fact, that this is a crisis of legitimacy and efficiency that we're in the middle of. If we talk about democracy as being both necessary to be legitimate in the eyes of the people in the democracy, the people who are in elected positions, they need to be legitimate in the eyes of the people who are subordinate to that. But we also have effectiveness. We really need to deliver what needs to be delivered. One thing in the Swedish context that we sort of got, I think at least, a bit too unbalanced, that we are focusing so much work in the participatory work on what I see as the municipality or the region or the county as a service provider. We need to democratize this work once again, because we've lost that. So instead of talking about all the houses where they're going to be or not going to be, we have to also address the issue of how we're going to live together. So that is one major insight from my perspective. One part of that postcard also says we need to realize that power and knowledge has shifted out from our own systems and organization. It's everywhere. There are lots of competent people out there. There's lots of knowledge. I just heard this morning about people saying, well, the citizens have even stronger knowledge in the issues that we are addressing than we do ourselves. So we need to realize that power has shifted, and I'm going to come back to that. And the last part of that postcard says, our initial way of looking at this is normally to close. My desire would be to open up, because when it really gets hard, our instinct is to close, when we actually should be doing the opposite, opening up and including more voices in the work. The second postcard is a bit brutal to us as politicians or civil servants, where I include myself. We are a part of the problem. And we also, of course, a part of the solution. We cannot say, hey, people out there, you're not participating in the way we want you to, so get out of our way, we're going to do our job anyway, or it will criminalize it, as Giovanni was in earlier. We need to realize that we are actually a part of the problem. I'm brutally saying we have a structurally based arrogance in our profession. We need to be more open that there are different views, because we do not, and I don't know the English term for this, so I'm going to ask Edward, tolkningsföreträde.
We claim the kind of right or privilege of interpreting, yes. I guess, yeah.
So we assume that tolkningsföreträde is the one that we obviously have, and that is the right question, the right one. The third postcard, which I think we should read, is about complexity, and that's the zone where we work in. And complexity is actually just accepting the fact that there is no single solution. Stop looking. Because if we address a complex issue as if it were simple, we might actually just be making it worse. I saw it on the news yesterday about segregated areas in this area of Stockholm, or you can go to Gothenburg, where I live, where we put money into projects over 2-3 year periods. It's like a rain, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference, and people are just losing hope and saying, stop doing it, it's not doing any good for us. So what we need to do is go from the we need to accept the complexity and instead think about, how do we become more resilient? How do we manage this together? Because the risk is that we try to close up, get a control of everything, when we actually aren't able to do that. The fourth one would be similar to Josh here, is to go deeper. We need to go deeper into the work we do together. We need to go deeper into what we would call the conflicts, the heat. We make a very distinctive shift between different types of dialogues, and the basic one is we have the dialogues we've been practicing for quite a lot of time, which is called sitting around the fire. They're nice, they're happy, and would require lots of post-it notes. I'm not ridiculing that, I'm just saying that's a way of doing it. But we also need to address the issues that are more complex and probably heated. So we need to learn how to sit in the fire together, because in that fire there's the energy of looking at and doing something differently. And that is the fifth postcard, would be resistance. And many officials that I meet, politicians or anything, they say, well, they're resisting us. Well, I'm sorry, that's engagement wrapped in barbed wire. Because it does look like that, because from the other side of that, that is what we're looking for, engaged people. But from our perspective, it looks like resistance and people resisting our tolkningsföreträde or our perfect work. So we need to do that differently. Last two ones, when we speak about dialogue and dialogues, participatory processes, we think quite a lot about how can we design them, how can we enable them, how can we facilitate them. I would never, ever even think about saying that should sort of replace what we would call the representative democracy. It is based on enriching. It's a complementary set of ways of working so we can build the trust that we need to actually have in order to make this thing stick together. Last one is, what seems to be happening is the world is being digitized in every way possible. So what I believe we need also to work on the polarity of digitization. We need to come into the human side. We need to meet face to face again. Because in those meetings, actually people can see each other in the eyes and can start trusting. And that is by default a local activity. And that's where I think we also need to focus our work on, not the big scale. We need to work on the local democracies, and that's our challenge. So I hope that this might give you something to be inspired by or really upset by. I don't know which. Thank you.
Or maybe a bit of both. I mean,
hopefully.
We're using a lot of nice metaphors of earthquakes, and here's the engagement wrapped in barbed wire. What I heard you sort of say, key messages there, I mean, we don't really have a choice. This power shift is happening. We are part of the problem. This isn't simple. And for me, that's quite challenging as a practitioner. Because how many times are we doing dialogue looking for simple answers when maybe that is part of the problem? And the need for this human touch, which I think is also very well taken. So now we have...
Because in Italy, the postcards will never arrive because of the post. So
they won't in Sweden either, so it's just a metaphor.
Very good. So Anne, your experiences from Denmark,
Yes.
and you've worked a lot with co-production and similar issues.
Yeah.
So how does it look from your
Well,
perspective?
in a way, it's difficult to be the last one because I can more or less agree with the other ones. I'm going to say a little bit more anyway. I see citizen participation and dialogue as a question of what kind of welfare society do we want in the future. And in that theme, governance is very important. And that's what Martin also touched on, that we have different governance regimes. We have new public management, new public governance, co-production, and the idea that citizens, civil society can co-produce welfare, can co-produce social capital, empowerment together with public organizations really belong in the new public governance regime. And we talk a lot about that. That's what I'm seeing in the Danish municipalities also. Ambitions, strategies, policies, saying we want to involve, we want to empower. But when it comes to practice, new public management is the dominating paradigm. And really our big challenge right now, if we want to move our societies in the direction of more sharing power, working together, engaging all the resources, is that we need to challenge this new public management way of thinking. Because all of you are in a cross pressure between these paradigms. I'm sure that you experience that when you try to do citizen participation, to collaborate with external partners, that you're always being asked to be effective at the same time, to tell what will be the result of this process, this collaboration, to do it within short time limits, and all the other logics that belong to the new public management way of thinking. And you can't develop co-production within this paradigm. So we really need to challenge on the governance level. We need to challenge the way we are thinking, and that is to say that, as Martin said, you are part of the problem in a way. Not that you are being evil or incompetent or anything. But it is difficult to start to work differently. And I think the big challenge in this field is to support you as politicians and as civil servants on how to work differently, and also on reflecting on the cross pressure that you're in. Learning, discussing, reflecting about the difficulties that are in this area. And so I will finish by saying there's a lot of stories out there. It is a field that is normatively loaded. It's like we're always talking in positive ways about citizen participation and dialogue. we need to talk more about what is difficult, why it is difficult, and how we can overcome difficulties. Because if we don't talk in these more reflective reflective and learning ways, we will not move in this field. So, sorry if I'm upsetting you. Yeah, that was my words.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, you're very... that was incredibly efficient. So what I thought we would do is just I'll try and pick up some of the threads. So grab yourself a glass of water if you need it. One of the things I heard you all saying is the need for a kind of shift in how we think about participation, or thinking about it. And picking up on your last point there, Anne, about the need to not just be positive. And I think a lot of the time when we're in these conferences, we talk about best practice. And I actually find that oftentimes I learn the best from worst practices, or bad practices, or things that didn't work as planned. So I thought I'd just throw out a challenge to you. Looking at how participation works today, do you have a kind of a worst practice that you would really like to see local governments stop doing?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I've been researching co-production, and one of the things that really show up is that governments, civil servants, politicians want to define the problem. They take sort of defining power over what are we looking at here, what are we solving, what are we working with. I would really like that to stop, because that would make room for other ideas about what the challenge might be, what the problem might be. And I think this really is one of the big challenges that, of course, in taking on responsibility as a public servant, you think you need to know what the problem is. And it's a very big, it's a big thing to give out the definition of the challenge or the problem to other people, to external actors. But that is what is really needed in these processes.
Why do you think local government or other bodies cling to that definitional
Why?
power? Yes, why? Do you have a thought about...
I think responsibility or idea of what it is to be a responsible civil servant is one thing. And then fear of what might happen. What happens if I lose control? I think really that the fear of losing control and not being able to control the outcomes of processes is one of the most difficult things to handle for both politicians and civil servants.
So Martin and then Giovanni.
I would like to build upon that, because something about the fear of losing control, but from my perspective, in order to start doing that, you have to reflect upon, oh, I have a strong desire to have control. And that painful reflection of, oh dear, that's why we are designing the way we are working. So I would ask us to really think about how we design our participatory processes independent of set of tools or things like that. And I meet lots of people saying, well, we open our doors, they didn't show up, they're doing it, they're not interested anymore, let's keep doing our job in a professional way. So we use their lack of presence as a, what do you call it?
Justification?
A justification for our professional interpretation of what is right and good. That is totally, from my perspective, wrong to do, because we need to at least see the legitimacy in the other perspective and start exploring that. And very simple, that the best way is to start listening, and don't just open the door and come and say, hey, what do you want us to do? Because you'll just get a Christmas list, which is totally impossible to realize. Go out there and listen in the different directions. We talk about listening in 360 degrees. And if you hear a lot of things on symbolically the yes side, this is what we need, this is what we need, actively look for the no side, the alternative perspective, because it's there, but maybe in our way of designing, maybe in a way of listening, we're actually making it impossible to be heard. So really look for the polarity, I think is desirable, but that means being able to reflect upon, well, risk, or actually see the benefit of losing control, because then the world expands.
Thank you. Giovanni?
Going further in the steps of a participatory process, I had a lot of cases of politicians that wanted to be the moderator of the sessions. So they thought that participation does not deserve investments of money, so professional moderator, facilitators, but they could do this themselves. And what happened in these cases is a polarization, a tremendous polarization of the discussion, because they will answer to the people that shout more against them. The other people that is proposing things will be silenced, and so this will destroy the environment. And so I think that participation has costs, and many politicians do not accept that. And going in the cycle further, the third steps, I think, starting from what she said, is when politicians were to interpret alone the results of a process of participation, which is normally the base for cherry picking. No? So it's there you decide what was important in the discussion, what was minoritarian or does not interest you, and on that you build something where the citizens are not central anymore. What is central is your projection on the process. Participatory process has this tendency many times. They are not done for the people. They are done for the politician who proposed them. And this has to be stopped, I think, because when you communicate to people that they will be central, they have to continue to be central in all the process until the evaluation and the restart of the next cycle.
Josh?
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that, and would add, as a practical note, the concept of time and when you engage people. And as far as a worst practice, I think waiting too late to engage people. If you ask, when should we engage people, the answer is usually yesterday, that you should have already done it, and the earlier the better. And that can look differently at different times. It may mean talking with a few community leaders to get some initial feedback on your ideas before having a public meeting. But I'd say don't wait. And we've been learning a lot from kind of civic technology and Silicon Valley ways of approaching work, for better and worse. There's some things we don't want to learn from that. But some things that I think we have found useful are the concepts of iterative design and failing forward. So iterative design is that you want to put out something soon and then revise it based on feedback. Don't try to come up with a master plan for your participation and bring it out. That's too late. So come out with your initial idea, get feedback, revise it, share it, get more feedback, revise it, and keep doing this iteratively, cyclically. And then also don't be afraid to fail, that we learn the most when we fail. So it's okay to put something forward and have people say, that's awful, that you'll learn much more than if you don't do that.
Martin, do you have a comment on what was
Yes,
said?
definitely down that line also, because we talk about prototyping, trying on a small scale, and that would be, from my perspective, at least two things, is to lessen risk, because there's unnecessary risk and there's necessary risk, lessen at least unnecessary risk. So work in a smaller scale, but do not lose track of, still need the 360 degrees. And what seems to be a challenge, coming back to your first question, would be that we are so linearly programmed in our minds that you start there and you end there, and you have the end in mind actually when you even started. So it's a by default linear process based on a few people's assumption what's a relevant result. But opening up means you're a more iterative prototyping way. It's a learning process, but that means you have to design, you have to fund, you have to think about it in much more smaller sequences over a longer period of time. And that really challenges the way we've taught to think about in 12-month periods, quarters, or 3 months, and that is super challenging.
Giovanni?
I have a small story. Last year, some politicians and civil servants of Sweden visited Portugal, and one of the day we decided to do a training game on participatory budgeting with a group of students, immigrant students in a high school in Portugal. And I remember that what they told me in the end was a big emotion that the game gave to them, because they realized one thing that I think is very important. They said, when we discuss with children or young people in the school, is everything Pacific in the end? All the politicians of every color in the end of the discussion say, oh, perfect, we have to do that. And nothing happened then. Our game was about conflict. All the game was full of conflict. The Swedish politicians were working with immigrant children of Portugal, and all the time they were conflict about the desire, different standpoints. And they said, we have to use more this idea that conflict must emerge, cannot be hidden by participation, but has to be valued by participation. And maybe this type of things has to be started since the early ages, working with children with this perspective.
Yeah, so it's linking it to politics and tough choices. So if I try and sum up what you said, if I want to design a bad process, I should wait until the last minute. I should really decide what the problem is and what the solution is. I should run a process on my terms, and when people don't show up, I say they don't want to. And then I interpret, cherry pick the results I want. So that's the kind of bad practice, and it's good to look at that. Not particularly encouraging. So I thought, let's throw out a more positive question. What's happening right now that excites you about this field? Is there any particular technology or development or activities in a particular country or area that you're really excited about? Martin?
Well, I'm excited more or less all the time, it seems like. But for me, it's so rewarding the work that Sala has started around actually trying in many different ways of how can we actually do this in real life. And for the field that I'm especially interested in, the complex issues that are potentially conflict-based, are all the political leaders here, I know some of you very well by now, who are so courageous to start opening up. And that really excites me. But I'm also excited about all the civil servants who try to do something. And you seem to be very persistent, because this is something we'll have to be doing for quite a long time. But what seems to be exciting me even more right now is that when we are doing this in Sweden, we've gotten stuck in a positive, let's try it out, project, process thinking. So it's like small things in a big world. And I see my friends down in Luton down there, I'm so impressed by their work, and you'll hopefully listen to them later, is that what they've managed to do, and I'm not making anything up, I hope, so you'll have to correct me later on. But they managed to put that way of thinking into a structure, in a holistic structure, where they're using all the parts in some sort of holistic way, in the way of managing, leading, and working. So it's come to a next level, because that's what's necessary. So those examples represent for me that it is possible to reach that, but it at least takes 10 years. So for me, it's inspiring, but you just have to...
Keep at it.
Keep at it.
You've put a slide up, which I'm interpreting to mean that you have something to say, Giovanni.
Yeah, I want to underline, I'm sorry also for my colleagues that I use images, but my background as an architect needs images.
We love you still, Giovanni.
Okay, so it's strange, because we see something there and something here, which is completely different.
Well, let's see if I can...
That's sort of life.
The first idea is the integration between different democratic innovation. For example, I think what is growingly happening, but is still very marginal, is about the integration of participatory budgeting and social currencies, for example. The possibility that social currencies, which are very diffuse in Europe and also in America, could be integrated somehow and produce added value, not only in financial terms, but also in social terms. So I think that these marginal changes has to be highlighted in order to become mainstream somehow. The second thing, I'm observing a gradual expulsion of gatekeeper from the line of a participatory cycle, which I think is very important for the reason I said before. When you say to people you are the center, you cannot then, in fact, transform them into marginal actor and continue to have politicians and bureaucratic, technocratic people entering in different steps of the project and expelling people. So I think this has to be very carefully considered, especially when technology appears, because technology have a big part in the back stage, and so they can create new gatekeepers. The third thing is about the systemic vision of participation, which I think is very important. I said many times, maybe because I ran 2.5 years of a project on participatory system and multi-channel system. So for me, it's very important the idea that we can use very different channels, but then in the end, we must converge in a space of co-decision where people feel really protagonists. And I think this is the example of Lisbon reshaping of the website. in order to reduce cost of participation of people. Before they had like 5 registration for each participatory process. Now they have a common login. So I think the technology can help in this. If they cannot be the center of a participatory process, but they can be very usefully at the service of a reduction of personal cost of participants. Thank you.
Thank you. So motivations and tying it all together in a sense. Anne?
Yeah, I'm excited about some extreme cases of participation, you might say, because I think these are cases where you often learn more and you have to do more. And these cases I'm thinking about are involving homeless people, involving prisoners in jails, involving people who have very little resources seen from the definition point of view. And there are especially some people in Denmark working with these groups that are using all the kind of methods and approaches that I think should be much more common, also working with ordinary people. Like going out to seeking up people, making outreach activities, having long conversations with them, mediating conflicts, asking about their needs, about their daily lives, using anthropological methods, spending a lot of time getting to know how they live, what their visions and dreams are. And finally, canalizing all these everyday experiences, needs, visions, dreams into the system and making it work as new initiatives. I really think that's an exciting road in this. Yeah.
So learning from unexpected, these more ambitious processes,
Yeah.
and that if it works for what we call the hard-to-reach groups, it's
Exactly.
probably a good idea for everyone.
Yeah. And there's this discussion: are they hard to reach, or are they just easy to ignore?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's a very good challenge to
It's
throw
like
out to us.
when we say democracy must work even for those who are most difficult to reach in a democratic sense. So really that is where we should start in a way.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of these comments. I'm also excited by these developments. Two other things that haven't been mentioned as much that I'm excited about. One is using participation as a tool for social movements to achieve their goals, not as an end in itself. So those of us in the room, we're kind of participation nerds. Like we love participation regardless of the impact it has in a sense, we just like it. And to have more impact, we need to talk more with people who don't already think participation is inherently good. But they have other goals. And say, how can the tools and processes that we use, how can they help them achieve their goals? So in the US, that looks, for example, like discussions we've had with groups that are working to end mass incarceration. And so how can participatory democracy be a tool that they can use to empower people who are affected by mass incarceration, by
What's mass incarceration?
imprisonment of people.
Okay,
The massive
sorry.
imprisonment of people in the US.
Maybe I was the one not knowing that.
No, yeah, it's something we specialize in.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, and especially people of color. So we have the highest incarceration rates, and millions of people are incarcerated in the country or in prison. And so, how can we empower people who are victimized by the police, who are imprisoned, to actually change criminal justice policies? How can we help students to make schools safer and more supportive for them? So reaching out a bit to other movements. And the other thing, which Giovanni touched on as well, is how can we scale up this work? We've seen lots of experiments and decades of experiment after experiment. And normally in social science or sciences, if you do an experiment and you have good results, you don't just keep doing more experiments, you also then apply that more widely. And I think that we need to be doing that more. So not just having small participatory budgeting processes, but saying this should be part of how budgeting works, this should be part of how government works, and let's mainstream this.
It's a challenge when we have a very nice community around citizen participation, reaching beyond and making it bigger. So it's been really useful to hear your thoughts. I'd like to invite you now in a kind of very short format, a sentence or two. Do you have any messages for the conference delegates? Any things you think that any suggestions for how to make the most of the conference?
Oh, the conference.
Yes, the conference or your time here these next 2 days.
Right.
Any messages?
Be simple. Be curious. You don't know it all. Be curious. What does the other view say? Would be my advice.
I think for me, it'd be pursue shared goals. Like these ideas and discussions are great, but we all know the conferences are the best when you have discussions in the hallway where you agree to do something that helps you and the other person. So let's figure out how we can help each other. Definitely come and talk with me if you think that we can help you. And I'm glad to talk with you about how you can help us to support our work.
Try to not to think that you are unique. Because every time we think we are unique, we don't listen to what the others are saying because we think that in our specific situation, this thing is not applicable. Try to do a sort of cultural translation. Take the juice of what the others are saying and try to recontextualize in your place, but don't think you are the only one in the world with that problem, because this is actually untrue in my 20 years of experience.
Yeah, I would say reflect and focus on the learning. Ask each other, what did you learn from this initiative? What are you thinking you might do differently next time? So all the time looking ahead and reflecting.
So thank you very much. I think a round of applause for our panel is due.